Once there was an old widow struggling to look after her farm. Her flock of sheep were wild with uncut fleeces. She had no children to help her, though she had helped deliver many in her life. She could go on no longer by herself. On the first day of winter, she decided to go to the fair to seek labourers looking for work. A young woman with red hair and green eyes caught her attention. Her name was Elian, and the old widow said, "If you help me keep my farm, you are welcome there as long as you like." The old widow returned to her farm with Elian. The red-haired woman stoked the fire and cooked delicious stews throughout the long winter. The little farmhouse was warm and clean. A year and a day passed. The farm was well looked after, and both of them were content. The winter came round once more, and as was the custom, they began spinning wool in the long nights after supper. The flock of sheep had been shorn of their fleeces in the spring, and there was heaps of wool to get through before the market. Tired from the effort, the old widow would go to bed, leaving Elian by the fire spinning the wool long into the night. Every morning, the widow would wake to find the pile of wool had all been spun. She couldn't understand how Elian managed it. One night, after a long evening of spinning, the widow was awoken by the full moon peering in through the window. She looked outside to see the strangest thing. In the middle of the blue field, Elian was on the spinning wheel, and singing and dancing in rings around her were the Tylwyth Teg, the fair folk. They were like humans but more beautiful, dancing with grace and singing in perfect harmony. In the morning, the wool had all been finely spun and wrapped into skeins. This continued long night after long night through the long winter, until one day, Elian disappeared. The Tylwyth Teg were known to take people, and the widow knew they had taken Elian. The farm was quiet, and slowly but surely the widow struggled. Once again, she was alone. Months passed. One winter night there was a knocking at the door, and the widow answered to a beautiful man. He said, "My wife is in labour, and you have helped deliver many children. Will you help us?" The widow agreed to help, and they travelled through the night to a small dark cave in the hills. The wind came in and out like the hill was breathing. The rocks were wet with damp and moss. In a dark recess of the cave was the man's wife in labour on a rough straw bed. She quickly set to work, and soon a beautiful baby was born. The man thanked the old widow. He handed her a small crystal jar of blue ointment and said, "Put a smear of this on each of the child's eyelids, and I will reward you generously. But if any gets in your eyes, it will not end well for you." So the old widow dabbed her finger into the ointment and smeared the blue liquid onto each of the sleeping baby's eyelids, curious but relieved to hand the strange liquid back to the man. The man told his wife he would be back soon, and entered through a door at the back of the cave the old widow hadn't seen before. She was collecting up her things to leave when she rubbed her sleepy eyes. When she opened them, she saw two worlds. Out of her left eye, she could see a beautiful room. Where the right eye saw a rough bed of straw, the left saw a four-poster bed lit with candles and glittering chandeliers. On the bed, cradling the baby, was a woman with red hair and green eyes. It was Elian. The old widow was happy to see her. Elian explained why she had disappeared. She had made a deal with the fairies that if they helped her spin the wool, she would be wedded to one of them. She had tried to keep them away with an iron knife, for the Tylwyth Teg do not like iron, and to sleep under a branch from the rowan, because they will not cross wood from that tree. But one night she forgot her knife, and they took her away. Elian then said, "Do not let my husband know about your eye, and he will reward you generously. With your left eye, you see how they see this cave." The man returned with a bag of gold and helped her back to the farm. Every morning, the old widow found the farm clean and tidy. The fire was always stoked and a pot of stew bubbling. Sometimes in the night, she would hear singing from the field, and in the morning there would be skeins of the finest wool for the market. Time passed. One day, she returned to the market. It was rumoured the Tulloth Teg were there because the prices were high. Among the crowd, she saw Elian's husband stuffing apples into a sack, unseen by the vendor. She went to him and asked how they were. "They are well," he said, "but with which eye do you see me?" The old widow knew her mistake, and there was nothing she could do. As she answered, Elian's husband picked up a bulrush and scooped out her eye, and the old widow never saw the fair folk again.